welcome to the InnovAbility podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm the host of the podcast, and we have a fantastic episode here today. But before we get to that, I just want to let you all know that this podcast lives on the website GoScaleHR.com, as well as on our YouTube channel. So if you already subscribe to our YouTube channel, then you get notified when new videos are dropped. So I would encourage you to smash that bell. And then obviously, all of us want to actually hear from you. So leave your comments and likes and shares and so on. So this episode, it has a funky name. It's called InnovAbility, driving digital transformation with diverse talent. So InnovAbility, Innov is short, for innovation, and then ability is a sort of opposite of disability, so focusing on innovation and then ability. So what all that means, we'll dive into that shortly with our guest. So this topic, it's all about driving digital transformation with diverse talent. So what does that really mean? I mean, it's a pretty interesting topic. So the argument here is that people with disabilities need to be fully involved in the entire process of developing accessible technology. So, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, if they're not part of the process, if they're using the technology, but it's being built by people who don't have barriers like them, then the chance of them using a software that didn't actually help them is much higher. So the idea here is that people with disabilities, need to be part of that work. And so while I think it's safe to say, personally, we have seen a positive upward trend in this area. So we are starting to have more, visibility, focus on, the inclusive, design, rise of disability-led startup, and the creation of more accessibility testing communities like Fable as one example of a company. People with disabilities are still underrepresented in the workforces at companies. So I think that's so while there are some positive, we are seeing some positive movement. I think there's still a lot of room to improve. And so while there's still many barriers, to inclusion, as all of us know, if I see these barriers being knocked down, they're slowly starting to get knocked down. And I think that the key word is slow. And so we've talked a lot about in that those statements, but the idea here is that people with disabilities have to be part of the entire process from front to start when they're building new software and software tools. And so our guest today, Eyra Abraham, who was a long-time personal friend of mine, and obviously a member of the hard of hearing community like me. And so, Eyra, I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here today. Looking forward to having the chat with you.
And so, before we start, I just want to ask you, this is your first ever podcast, right?
It is. And so you probably tell I'm a little bit nervous, but yeah.
Don't worry about it. It's all good. When we get to the final version, you are, going to look absolutely fantastic. Nobody will ever know that you're nervous. So, but obviously nerves is, common. So let's get right into it. So, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. So I started a company, with the idea of solving my own challenge with hearing loss, and got involved in the artificial intelligence space, because one of the challenges as a person with a hearing loss, I slept through a fire drill and did not know about it and wanted to find a way to modernize traditional assistive devices for people with hearing loss. And I thought an answer with artificial intelligence, and knowing that we've gone through a transformation with our mainstream technology that can adopt AI. I was like, how can we leverage that for people with disability? Through that whole process, a lot of learning, especially from within the tech community, just understanding about AI and the impact that it has on people with disability. I'm trying to get people to be aware, essentially, of why we need to be thinking about people with disabilities as we continue to innovate into the future.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I've actually shared your, website, obviously, your company with,
Yeah.
a lot of people, and I think it's, I mean, you started that company a fair number of years ago now.
Yeah,
How many years ago?
it's getting close to 7 years now. Like this is before all the boom of AI, and it was just a few groups. It was all academic, and all the conversation about artificial intelligence were really in the university academic circles. And so, yeah, I remember when I started and like how it is now. It's kind of changed, gone crazy.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And so, obviously, just shifting gears just a little bit here.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think that we need to make the argument that there's massive business benefit for hiring people with disabilities. I mean, I think
Mhm.
some, I mean, you did lots of speaking work. So,
Yeah.
how do people with disabilities contribute uniquely to the digital transformation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things that I find is really unique about people with disabilities is that as individuals, because, okay, we should probably start with the definition and what I mean by disability. And particularly in Canada, we think about disabilities in where you have an ability to participate fully into whatever activity that you're doing. And people with disability, because we can't do that, we have to go from point A to point B somehow, some way. And we can't do it the same way that other people without disability can go, because everything is standardized, or everything is just the way we always done things in the workplace. But yet when people with disability have to find another pathway, and that's where innovation becomes a thing, because you have to try to find another way. And so that's why I think a lot of times we miss an opportunity to have people with disabilities in the workplace, because we're not following the true old path. We're now seeking new, innovative ways. And the other thing I would say why I think that we should think about people with disabilities as driver for digital inclusion, is because when you think about digital accessibility, for example, digital accessibility is just about making the digital space more accessible, and more easy and with limited barriers. Now, when you think about digital transformation, it's the same thing almost. But in a way, it's about making things more effective and easier, and to enable people to be more productive. And I thought it was interesting because when you think about digital accessibility and the process that's involved to make applications more accessible, website more accessible, those practices can be very useful for digital transformation,
Of course.
because you essentially are making things a lot more efficient. You're taking away that whole standard, what we've always done before, and trying to make the workplace more effective and productive. And so I think that's the secret that nobody really talks about often.
That's a really good point because I mean I remember sort of earlier in my career, you starting my career in government,
Yeah.
and I was this eager young buck, coming
Yeah.
into the workplace, and I remember I used to always ask people, well, why did you do things, this way, like it's the process this way? And I used to ask the question with full intentions of getting some kind of an answer back about well, it's the best way to do it for us. It's the most effective. It's most
Right.
efficient. Whatever it is, right? But I
Hmm.
used to always get answers. Well, we've always done it, you know, this way.
Yeah.
And then my next question is, well, are there any problems? And then I would sit there for hours on end and just hearing about all these different problems. And I
Mm.
keep thinking, well, why don't we fix it?
Yeah.
Right? And it's funny because, people with disabilities, like as you said, have to figure out a path forward. And so you have to get really creative. You,
Yeah.
you have to take some chances and some risks, and you have to
Yeah.
use brain power to kind of figure it out. And so,
Hmm.
I mean, we naturally have to have those skills,
Yeah.
by
By
force,
nature. Yeah.
uh,
Because
by nature. So,
we're constantly trying to figure out, like, we want to get to the same destination as everybody else, but when there's those barriers in the path that everybody takes, we're always going to look for other ways. And so that kind of having to grow up like that, you end up developing a skill set that is very unique for a digital transformation.
So, do you have any untold stories of innovation involving people with, disabilities that might stand out to you?
Yeah, and it's so interesting why it's untold. Like they don't really get it, but there seems to be a lot of innovation that started with people with disability. And I actually found out because I was just curious when I was starting my company, what kind of inspiration that I can get from products that are being utilized for people with disabilities that have gone mainstream. And I found out a lot. Like one of the first things is when we probably seen that story or that video with Steve Jobs and he's launching that very first iPhone to the crowd. But we don't realize that that flat screen started with an individual with disability. And it was a gentleman in Delaware. He was a student, and he was basically having a hard time using keyboards and the mouse because he had carpal tunnel syndrome. And so it was very, very painful for him to type on the keyboard. And he was wanting to complete his dissertation. So he was like, I need to figure out a way to build this innovation and technology. So he created the flat screen TV, IP'd it with the help of his professor. And then Apple noticed it. And they were like, we want that because we're building some new technology and we were thinking about something similar, but now that you figured it out, we need you. So they acquired his company and that's what we see today. And you're like, you don't really know that story and I don't know why it's not told, but it, yeah. And it's like crazy when you think about it. Other innovation stories that I've heard was like, the autopilot and cruise control in the vehicle that started with somebody who happened to be blind, who trying to figure out a way to navigate a vehicle on his own. We have like speech to text application back in the 1970s. The people who had limited mobility again could not use computers, keyboards, and mouse, and they needed to use the voice to help with navigating devices back then. Yeah, and then there's just so many other innovation, and it's crazy when you think about all the influences of people with disability because we again trying to find our pathway from point A to point B, but taking a whole new innovative way, and that's what. But the interesting thing is, it tells us that a lot of the technologies that we created can be useful for other people. So we really need to start to think about disability inclusion is not just about a specific group of individuals and supporting a certain market of people, but it can be impactful for everyone.
Well, I mean, it's a massive market. I mean, obviously, one of the more, oh
Keep
yeah,
growing. Yeah.
percent of the population. So, that's a good segue into the next question, which we're going to focus on hiring. I ask this question a lot, and I've been a part of this too, but I just want to hear from you. What are some of the common barriers that you see people with disabilities face during the hiring process? Particularly in the tech industry, I don't know, like if you notice that like any difference, but and then what can we do, to help candidates overcome these barriers?
Yeah, that's another good question. I can speak to this question because I graduated with a computer science degree many years ago and did not make my way into the tech industry. And I think one of the very first things, and I don't speak to everybody, so that's be clear there, but one of the first things we have to realize with the individual with a disability is that the minute that you see the resume, the story that explains that person, it comes from a millions of decisions that occurred prior. And those decisions can be impacted by society and stigma and barriers. And so when you have to think about somebody who has a disability from childhood, the education system that's impacting their opportunities maybe to get to university and, having to deal with assistive technologies and buying it and making that choice because they're not cheap. You're paying thousands of hundreds of thousands of dollars for some people, but most on average you can spend $10,000 to $20,000 on assistive technology. How does one family, middle class family, have to choose between that and somebody going to college? And maybe it means delaying school. Other times you're dealing with biases when you show up to an interview and somebody doesn't want to hire you. And then now when somebody and a new employer is seeing all of that history, not really you don't get that context in a resume. And so they can create a lot of barriers and lack of opportunity for people with disabilities to actually be even getting to the first interview stage. And the other thing I noticed in the tech industry, and it just kind of got more popular, but there's a lot of tests that you have to do to get a job, and especially if you're in a tech role. Those platforms that you use can be inaccessible. They might, if you have a vision loss, or they put a time expecting you to answer at a specific period, and that can be diminish the performance. And the irony is that we're using that technology or that process that used to come from the school education system that didn't really work and for many people with disability in the first place. And then we're bringing it to the workplace as part of the evaluating whether somebody is the appropriate candidate. And I just think that as long as we can be flexible and really understand what does it take to do that job and that role, most of the time some of the tests and the quizzes that we're asking have nothing to do with the role. And so being mindful of what the position's about and what are you really looking for. And then you can start to see that all the traditional pathways that we use to recruit can change as well and be innovative as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, what we've seen in the last, 15, 20 years is really because of the sheer volume of what we're dealing with is that recruiters or hiring managers, HR people want to try to make processes standardized, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes really easy. Well, obviously nowadays, that need for the standardization is not as great as it used to be because now we have technologies like AI to help us. But
Yeah.
I think the key in all this, what I'm hearing from you, is really about being flexible. So, I mean, sure, have a standard process, but you really have to make sure that you're crystal clear that, look, if someone needs some kind of accommodation, that it's just a part of standard practice. Right?
Exactly.
If I can't hear you and I need closed caption and you're not able to provide that, then let's have a conversation about that and we'll figure out a solution for that. So,
yeah, I agree.
yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because, I think we talked about the hiring, and the hiring is obviously a big issue and always is.
Yeah.
But then once the person gets hired,
Yeah.
then it just seems like everything just sort of falls to the wayside. So, how can companies ensure that the workplace culture supports and values the contributions of the employees with a disability? And then what can they start doing, today?
Okay. Well, I think the first thing is really doing an assessment of where your risk profile in terms of how accessible is your organization. I don't think a lot of our companies really know. Like they may think they are accessible, but then don't really know some of the barriers that already exist. And I think it's important to have a good sense of what could be the experience of the individual in the workplace. And the other thing I would say is that you're going to need data to really assess people, their disability inclusion practices. And I know sometimes some organization, the disclosure is very challenging and a lot of people do not feel comfortable because we're still harboring that kind of stigma that's ingrained in our society. And I think that executives in particular can help kind of normalize disability. And I think what I mean by that is that we have to realize disability impacts everybody. At the end of the day, it's going to affect us all at some point in our lives. It's probably the one identity that kind of unites us as humans because it's like in terms of everybody has it. It doesn't discriminate against gender or race. Disability is always around. And I think that we can start to see that it's the fabric of our lives and we can sort of normalize and have conversations around disability more often. There won't be this fear and all these myths that kind of harbor around disability. And then I think the last thing I would say is really just involve people with disability. You were making that point earlier, that we need to start to learn from the lived experience and have them part of the decision, whether it's through your processes. If you have a new initiative that's happening, bringing people with disability into those conversations from the start can be really helpful. And I think that that's a good start for any organization to is start on the journey and go to or still on the journey to continue to make the disability inclusion as a practice. Yeah.
Just on that thought, some people, that I've been speaking to, how to actually draw people in, outside of the organization. So they're looking to do certain things, A, B, and C, and they want to run it through almost like a test just to make sure that they haven't missed anything. But they don't really have anybody that's inside the organization, to really assist them. So they're starting to look outside, and I think that's a positive step in the right direction. And
Yeah.
I think because they recognize that, disabilities, there's like a million and one, different types. And like, even though like you and I are both, hard of hearing, how we cope with our disabilities is probably quite different. And then what you may need on a day-to-day basis might be different than me. And I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying there's a, high chance, that it is. So, but people have to be comfortable asking questions, and I keep saying that all the time. I think last year when we ran our first Rethinking Disabilities conference,
you spoke
at, which was fantastic. I mean, I think a lot of people asked a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And I remember saying that a million times. People, like everyone, please ask questions because, it's about learning and
exactly
opening up your mind. So,
and it's important to have that education because there's a lot of, like I said, of a fear just for people who are unfamiliar with the topic and whether they're going to say the right thing or, they want to be careful. And I think it's important that there is those opportunities where people can openly talk and have a discussion. It's critical.
Yeah. I do have a question about the future. Now, I know that this may be a difficult question because it talks about the next decade. And I'm not sure if that's really fair to you because I think the world changes like every day. So, so how do you see the role of people with disability evolving in the field of digital transformation over the next, decade, couple of years in the near future?
No, that's an interesting question too. It's always hard to predict the future. I wish I was really good at it.
We have AI models now.
So we do have an AI, yes, so we can definitely lean into the AI. But if I were to say, I think one thing I noticed, a lot of the inclusion practices centered around more consumer goods and common products, software. I think that there should probably be more opportunities to expand into different verticals. Some verticals that I see that could be used, like academic research, because I think the academic institution are they going to be looking at being more inclusive as they change and they go through their remodelization of what education should look like. I do think clean tech and some of the challenges there that we haven't really seen some solution, but maybe including people with disabilities to help foster new innovative ideas, help address some of those clean tech, climate change factor, healthcare as well. And I've been also seeing industries like mining, as odd as there's a lot of industries are going through bringing different types of human resources. They have to be innovative. The same practice that they were able to use before is not effective, but they still need to solve some of the current needs that society wants to be able to have, right? And so I think that a lot of organizations are going to be exploring, and I think in the next decade or so, more people with disabilities are going to be in some unconventional careers that we never really think about because there's a great opportunity. I've actually seen it in space, like NASA being kind of innovative, trying to see it is like space. I love the analogy, but they're like space is inaccessible anyways, right? So it doesn't really matter who goes up there. We can bring anybody up, and we're going to find a way to try to do. Yeah. So yeah.
NASA is a pretty interesting organization. I had the opportunity to meet the former head of HR at NASA. I'm here in Toronto, and I was just saying that, there aren't many organizations out there where I'm in awe of. And you wanted an S off because just like the sheer idea that you can still figure out a way to get people up into space. I don't know, it's just a sort of a weird
It is.
thing, but you're right. I mean, like for example, people. Well, I mean, depends on the uh, disability, but obviously, when the air is super light and you're floating, then it doesn't matter if you use a wheelchair or not, or
Right,
you can actually
exactly.
access that space.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just sort of one of those things. But
Mhm.
is the one thing that viewers watching this episode can walk away with learning? So what is that one thing?
One thing I would say, really to think about digital accessibility as the digital transformation. When you can adopt the practice of disability inclusion, when you're developing technologies or you're testing and engaging people, that you have people with disability from the start. And that can really help with that digital transformation that most organizations are trying to seek and achieve. So really start to look at digital accessibility as your pathway through to digital transformation. Yeah.
I think that is an excellent final part of the convention. So obviously, I want to thank you for being with us, and so for all of you, I mean, if you're interested in sort of learning more about accessibility software, how it all fits together, HR, I will share Eyra's contact information in the episode in the
Okay, cool.
summary, and of course, you can always contact me also. So once again, the Unmuted podcast, we talk about all things HR tech, talent, world of work, everything. And so all of our guests are all experts, leaders, HR leaders, practitioners, all in mostly North America. And I just want to thank you all for being here. And so once again, the episodes live on our website, ghostdailyhr.com, on YouTube. If you hit the subscribe button, then you'll be notified of new episodes that drop every Thursday. So, Eyra, thank you for being here.